Herman Elementary School in Highland Park, California. I can remember the first day I went there in kindergarten, and I cried because I missed my mommy, and they gave me a little doll to play with, and it was a black doll. And that made me cry even more. But I went there, and then from there we moved to Baldwin Park, and I went to Margaret Heath Elementary School and to a middle school called Central School. From there I went to Covina Union High School. That's where I graduated from high school. I went into the military service and attended school at Missouri Valley College in Missouri, William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri, where the prophet was held. And then I went to the University of Iowa. When I got out of the service, I went to the University of Southern California, and I took graduate work at Claremont Graduate School. I think there were a couple others I can't remember. Doesn't matter. But that's my schooling. I don't know if it did me any good or not, but you go ahead.
Oh, my schooling was much simpler than that. I went to a school that saw me through the 8th grade, and then on to, I forgot about that. I went to a school at, I'll talk to the camera. Anyway, I went to some other schools. That's all. Religion in childhood. Home. Okay, that's it now. Religion has always been in my whole life. My parents were very religious, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in an atmosphere of love for our Savior, and had many times in my life the ability to understand something that looked like it might not be good, and then have it turned out right because of faith.
Weren't your parents social scientists, like Christian scientists?
For a while, they were Christian Scientists.
Well, in my home, my father and all of his family were Catholic. He was not a practicing Catholic, though. And my mother had been born and raised in the Latter-day Saint Church. And so that's what we followed in our home during my childhood. My mother always saw that we went to Sunday school and primary, and my father never objected to any of that, but he never went to church except on very rare occasions, like maybe on an Easter morning or something like that. But we were very close to the church and very close to the Savior in our home. Do you remember your first crush?
Yes, I do. My first crush was my only crush up to that time. Just one. Then, unfortunately, that didn't turn out too well. But that turned out beautifully as far as my beautiful twin boys were concerned. I'll always be grateful to my first husband for that.
I have so many crushes I can't tell you all, but one of my Bobby stories is my first crush on Daphne Bell in the first grade. And Daphne was a cute little girl, blonde, little curly hair type of thing, and I finally got up nerve one time to ask her if I could carry her books home. And she agreed, so I took her books, and then we stopped down at the bottom of our street where they were putting in a big storm drain. They had these huge cement pipes that were about 5-6 feet deep. And as kids, we used to go down there and get on them and slide down them. And so I took Stephanie by there. I thought it'd be fun. And sometimes these pipes, when they made them in the forms, left little pieces of wire sticking out. And so I got up on this one, I went sliding down and tore the whole back of my pants out. And so I had to stand with my back toward this pipe. And I said, Daphne, here's your books. I can't go any farther. And so I had to stay there while she went home. But then after that, I had a crush a week.
Oh.
I was in love with Dinah Shore, Linda Darnell. I mean, you name it, I had them.
Yeah, then you were just practicing for me, dear.
How'd you learn to drive?
How I learned to drive. Oh my goodness. It's a very funny story. I hadn't ever thought that I would drive, but my father had a good friend of his, and we were riding toward town. We were going downtown, and this was in the other man's automobile, not my father's. And I made some kind of a remark when we were on the outskirts of town about, gosh, this, that, and the other, and my dad's friend said, okay, come on, take it over. Let's see if you can learn how to drive. My dad's hair stood on end. And, oh, she's never driven. Oh, that's okay. This is a good time to try it now. So he moved over, and I took the wheel, and, and I drove very carefully and wisely. And my dad was turning all different colors of the rainbow. And then we got into middle town in Phoenix, and there were a lot of cars, and I did extremely well. I didn't get in a bad situation at all, and that was how I learned to drive.
Was it
by doing it.
Was it a stick shift or automatic?
Gosh, honey,
Makes a big difference.
I don't know that they had automatic.
Well, they did.
I
Sure.
think it was a stick shift. But I had always wanted to when I had watched my dad drive and so on. But anyway, all was well.
My dad had a stick shift Chevrolet, 1933 Chevrolet. And we had kind of a long driveway. And when I was about, 12 years old, 13 maybe, I'd get in and start the car. My dad didn't even know this, really. And I would put it in gear, and I'd drive up the driveway to the garage, and then I'd put it in reverse, and I'd back up, and then I would just drive back and forth in the driveway. And that's how I learned to drive. Then shortly after that, I took the car out on the road for the first time. I didn't have a license, though. And I told you the story once before. I'm going down the road, and I had made up my mind that I was going to turn left at the next street. And so I had that all programmed into my mind. I couldn't change it. So I got up there and turned, just as I turned, the sheriff was coming down that street. And I turned, I made my left-hand turn and bumped smack into the sheriff, bumper to bumper. He just backed up and he says, Bobby, what the hell are you doing out here? and I learned to drive. But when I was 14, I actually got a license, because in those days, if you worked, and I did, I had to work at a chicken rack several miles away, your parents could sign off for you to get a license. So I've had a driver's license since I've been 14 years old. My military service was in the Navy. When I was in high school, the World War II had broken out, and most of the young men were anxious to go enlist, and I went to Los Angeles and enlisted in the Naval Air Corps, and was sworn in by a very famous World War II fighter by the name of Joe Foss. And then, because the Naval Air Force was sort of full at that time, they sent me to these schools that I've mentioned, like Marshall or Missouri Valley College, which were officer training schools. And so I spent about the first year and a half in the military, in officers training school. I never finished any of them because I was a little bit of a maverick. I wanted to go fight, and so I eventually became an ordnance man. I worked on the machine guns and the bombs and things that airplanes carried in the service.
None.
You got a lot of
career. No, I've had a lot of careers. Actually, most of my careers were in the theater, and I went back to New York for a while. A woman had a large business of helping youngsters, and she knew my mother and she knew me, and I went back with her for a while, but I got bored because nothing was really happening, and I knew I was a pretty good actress, and I was. So I went back home again, and then my parents got together some other people, and put out a play that went over very big. And from then on, I started doing my acting, and I just loved it.
You had other careers. You were
Oh, yes, yes. I had other later on, and I had other, excuse me, business careers and so on and so forth, but they were not the ones I loved.
Aren't you mentioned that you were, whatever you were with Anchor? Oh, it doesn't matter.
Not really.
Okay.
I did modeling, so on and so forth. Go ahead.
Careers. Well, my first career was at age 10. And I had a neighbor that had a garden and some chickens. And I would hoe his garden and water his garden and clean out his chicken coops for 25 cents a day. But I graduated from that to selling magazines, doing all sorts of mischievous things. But basically, when I got out of the service, I went to school and became a teacher. And I taught school for 10 years. I taught in the sciences, biology, chemistry, zoology, and stuff like that. And then, while I was doing that, I also worked outside of the school in a program for young people in athletics and things, after-school programs, and trying to make enough money to really survive, because they didn't pay teachers very much in those days. And so I got a part-time job with a stockbroker, selling securities and things. And I got interested in them. I didn't know much about them before, and decided that one of the best ways that people could invest in securities was through a mutual fund. So I was instrumental with a group of friends to form a mutual fund. And then I acquired a couple other mutual funds. And then I got interested in the insurance business, and I developed a teaching course for all of the New York Stock Exchange people to learn how to sell insurance. And I taught classes all over the country to stock exchange brokers. And then I became involved in the insurance business as an chief executive officer.
I forgot to say one thing that I enjoyed so very much, and that was when my mother wrote The Fall of the House of Usher, and we put it on in California on television. My father directed it. We had friends who were very good actors with it. And that was more fun because I got to faint on screen so beautifully, right down. I know it was beautifully because after the whole show was over, the men who had sponsored it came back and they wanted me to know what they thought that was the most beautiful thing that they had ever seen. Okay.
Faint.
Yes, down we go. Boom.
Okay, well, of course, you all know I've been divorced. I had a tremendous divorce.
That's enough.
I'm not going to go into the details. I'll just tell you one thing. The last court proceeding, the judge was up on the bench and he had the file of my divorce. I didn't divorce my wife. She divorced me. But anyway, there were 3 stacks of paper about this thick. And the judge looked down at my attorney and says, "Hey, who's your client, J. Paul Getty?" Because at that time, J. Paul Getty was the richest man in the world. And he said, anybody that has this much stuff on divorce must be a very wealthy man. Of course, I wasn't. I borrowed all the money to do it. But anyway, and then I got remarried to a beautiful woman, Beverly, and we had a great life together. I sold our business, and we kind of semi-retired and traveled a lot. But she contracted cancer, colon cancer. We traveled a lot to take care of that too. But she eventually died, and then I married Grandma.
But she was one of the most beautiful women I've ever known, and she was also a very sweet, loving woman.
Very passionate. She had 2 children, Jerry and Kenny, which we consider to be our kids also. And all the things, we've never used the word stepmother, stepfather, stepchildren. They're just all our kids, period. And I doubt if I'll ever go through it again. Well, I don't know. He keeps flagging divorce up there. What do you think?
I don't know. I never have one.
Oh, I know. Okay.
How we met, got engaged. Well, my goodness, we were both working for the same company in Arizona. And nothing ever happened. I mean, I never dated, by the way. Couldn't be bothered. That's after my first husband died.
We just knew casually.
Just
at that
casually,
company.
just as members of the same company. And I forget exactly what happened. After John left the company and went to Canada to work for a company up there. Excuse me, I had one or two times when I had to call him or write him because of business that was engaged in there. And he came down to Phoenix, I don't know how many times.
Oh, 2 or 3 times.
2 or 3 times, anyway. And then he asked me if I would, did you call me or write me? How?
About come up here?
Uh-huh.
That was later. I wrote
Yeah.
to you.
Okay. And because we had sort of had a little bit of a correspondence between each other for different reasons about, mostly, all of it actually was about the company. But as it turned out, I knew the kind of a man he was, and I knew it would be, as he said, excuse me, a decent visit, and I'd always wanted to come up because of my mother's being in this area. So I went up, flew up, and John had told me that he was going to go across the river and spend the nights over there with an old man that had a cabin, but he didn't. What he did was sleep in the back of his truck to be closer in case, I guess, that boogeyman came or something, I don't know. Anyway, he was wonderful, and the second day we did a lot of hiking, and the second day we were having breakfast or luncheon in the little cabin. And
We didn't have a cabin, we had a trailer.
Trailer, okay. And he asked me to marry him, and I almost fell through the floor.
I tell
No
a much better
idea.
story about this than you
Oh,
do.
this is my point of view.
Okay, go ahead.
Gosh, it was, I think I probably gulped, and I said, well, blah, blah, I don't. He said, well, and I don't know what made me say it, but I said, okay, yes. And that was the beginning of our courtship, and I left for Arizona the next day on an airplane. And I think that's how we got engaged. And what do I admire most about John? There's so many things that I admire about John. He's honest, he's kind, he's good, he's loving. There's no one like him. I love him.
No, really what happened is this.
From your point of view.
I left Canada and came down here. I'd owned this property for several years, but had never really seen it. I came down here and had a trailer brought in, and I was living here. I was kind of lonely, all by myself. I was cleaning things up and working. And I'd write to people I knew. And I had seen Patty several times. I went to Phoenix. I wrote her a letter and just told her how great it is up here. I think I sent her a picture of me holding 2 deer antlers up here on my head. Told her how the animals were and so forth. Anyway, she wrote back and she said, well, gee, my mother was born in Idaho on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. That's what made me think she was an Indian.
I thought I was an Indian.
Anyway, so I wrote back and said, well, why don't you come on up here sometime and I'll show you where your mother was born. And that's how she came up for the first time.
That's what I'd always
But
wanted.
she forgot that when I picked her up in Idaho Falls and we were coming back, she asked me if I liked chocolate cake. And I said, oh yeah. So she said, well, let's stop and get the fixing. So we stopped at the market and got the fix, and she baked this chocolate cake, and I said, anybody that can bake a chocolate cake like that ought to be worth something. So I took her, and it wasn't.
You took me. What do you mean you took me? You did not.
We went down the river. We didn't do too much hiking. We did a little hiking, but we went floating.
Yeah.
And the photographer that I am, I was sitting on the back of the raft taking a picture of her up in the front while we were going through the rapids.
We were facing.
And we hit a bump, and I started to fall out, and she grabbed my leg and pulled me back into the raft. And that's when I said, will you marry me? Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, and what I admire about her, she has a good sense of humor, she's beautiful, she's compassionate, and she's tolerant of me most of the time. Anyway, she's a great gal.
Life here in Shoop.
Our life.
Our life in Shoop is probably ideal for both of us, because not only I, as I was growing up, always wanted to live in an atmosphere such as this with pine trees and water, and mountains. I always wanted to do that. And here we are, living exactly where we want to live.
What most people don't really understand, though, about our marriage is that we live out here. We don't have electricity. We don't have a lot of the facilities that people have, no television and so forth. But we're together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and have been for nearly 28 years now. Most people could not live that way. Most people would get on each other's nerves, or they'd say, well, I've got to have a break, or give me some space and stuff like that. But that's never been a problem with us. We just enjoy everything. We see everything. Oftentimes we'll be driving and we'll both start to talk at the same time and make the same comment about something we've seen, because we're so compatible. You do your children first.
I do my children because I only had two. I was blessed with twin boys. And I can't say more than that, except that I'm forever grateful to my Heavenly Father for these men and the men that they have turned out to be. Have some beautiful grandchildren. And I'm very proud of Douglas and of Charles and of Charles and of Douglas for the kind of men that they are.
When were they born?
When were they born?
Yeah, it says dates.
In California.
No, when?
Oh, a long time ago.
Halloween.
Hmm?
They were born on Halloween.
Well,
on
yes.
October the 31st, 1955.
See.
And one of the funniest stories about them was when they were being baptized in the Baptist church. Tell that.
No, you don't.
No, I don't remember.
Come
I
on.
wasn't that. No, you're your turn.
No, oh no,
Sure.
you don't. Well, I think he's referring to the fact that they swam out to the minister instead of walking because they were so little, and so they swam out.
They went in the baptismal
It was so
font.
funny, yes. Okay.
Well, I had 4 children: Johnny, Jimmy, Jeffrey, Jane from my first marriage, and Jerry and Kenny from my second marriage. And I couldn't begin to tell you their dates or when they were born, but they've all turned out to be good kids. We had a lot of fun. We've always had a lot of fun doing things. We've done a lot of camping, a lot of trips. We've had a lot of animals and stories about the children. Well, I don't know what kind of stories we would tell. I mean, when my kids were little, they used to always love to have pets, and so even though I had a fear of snakes, I'd gotten over that. And so we had a lot of pet snakes and pet chinchillas. We didn't have a cage for them, so we just put them in the crawl space under the house, and they'd be sleeping in bed, and all of a sudden you hear something gnawing on them. The chinchillas would be gnawing on the wood under the house and so forth. They all went to college, And they all have families of their own, and seem to be doing pretty good considering the times.
Oh, I want to say something about the children.
Well, go ahead, say it. Go ahead.
Children can be very difficult with second marriages, and I never had to face that. I was welcomed, and I feel loved by all of the children. My grandchildren, I adore. They're so kind and so good, and I wouldn't change anything about our family at all.
Well, in terms of discipline, I was only really severely disciplined twice by my parents. Once by my father, once by my mother. I'd gone out with some friends and told my dad I'd be home like at, say, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock came, I wasn't home. My father went looking for me. And it was a rainy night, and instead of being at the house where I was told him I would be, we went to another guy's house. When my father found that, he just says, "Get home." Well, I got home, and I was soaking wet from the rain. I was in the bathtub. My father came into the bathroom, and he had a little twig from a peach tree we had, and he went whack right on my rear end, just once. Didn't say a word to me. Turned around and walked out. Well, I knew from that moment on I should never tell my dad anything that I couldn't keep. And my mother, she was such a sweet woman that she gave me a spanking once because I forget what I was doing. But most of the time, my parents would not scold, but they'd say, "Well, you shouldn't be doing that, Bobby." Or, "If you're going to do that, do it in such and such a way." We lived in a home where you just have to worry about being disciplined. And with my kids, I'd never really did anything except Johnny, the firstborn. I was pretty severe with him. And I used to think you had to spank a kid to make him behave. And I spanked Johnny several times. And I regret to this day that I ever did it because I have nightmares about it. But the rest of my kids, we gave them a pretty free rein, counseled with them on what they should and shouldn't do, but they did some things that that I would not approve of. But they still did. Like Jimmy was a motorcyclist. I thought that was crazy, but he was good. He was smart. Knew what he was doing, and so I don't know. That's about it for the kids.
My parents and me, my parents never raised a hand to me. I was never struck. I don't remember really any lectures. If they had an idea or something about me or about somebody that I knew or what, they would just calmly explain to me what they didn't think was appropriate, and that was all it took. I always loved being home. I was interested in everything that they were interested in and vice versa. My children, I have lots of children now. Not legally many, but maybe, but they're legally. My twin boys, I loved very, very much. When I was pregnant, no one was aware of the fact that there were two little babies. And then when the time came and I was ushered into the room and the doctor was there and the nurse turned to him as it was because I had to have an operation. The boys were so big. She turned to the doctor and said, "Oh my God, there's two of them." I'll never forget that. And they were both beautiful children. They were strong, and I am eternally grateful to my Heavenly Father for them and for their families and for our families.